not, you just can't, no decisions made. We'll have another meeting, and there is already, I guess, a meeting scheduled for Tuesday. Right. And you, before. Oh, okay, so you do time on that day, I guess. So
let's first, when Marcia is ready. Are you ready, Marcia? Meeting materials that people can be looking at? Okay, they just have to. I think okay.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I know this is like after a long meeting that after a long day of work, I appreciate you being able to find the time. It's hard to carve the time. There won't be any decisions made today. So we could take the opportunity, it is live streamed, to have some discussion, or we could totally at this time try and arrive at a meeting date. Checking with a couple of you, Tuesday seemed like a possibility. Does Tuesday 8 a.m. work before it's the day after Labor Day?
I will not return to this time.
Friday the 9th.
Yeah. And based on, if there's going to be a discussion, I personally would prefer to discuss first and see where things are at, because I may or may not be a necessity in this decision based on where we want to go. So
I probably, if people have questions, we'll go around. So there's more information because it was kind of late that night and you didn't have sort of all the materials there in front of you. So it would be an opportunity to discuss rather than holding all that discussion until later time. So is the feeling of the board that they would rather sort of have a discussion now, no decisions will be made, and then mull over any discussion we have today and try and meet next week?
And I really regret having found this, but it bothered me. I cannot find anything in the law, and Matt pointed out to me, that says 4 of us can't talk. We can't make any decisions. We can't have
That's
any.
correct.
But I'm going to have to formally, with respect, object to the fact that we've opened the meeting. There should have been no meeting.
The meetings of the way meeting, because there was no notice through an administrative error. And so the formality of opening it is, I can tell you it is a void meeting. So we.
Even under Governor Hochul, we could continue, she's continued the emergency laws, but there should have been more notice than was given. And unfortunately, we made the decision and out of consideration for our village clerk, we had let her go prior to the end of our executive session. So even though we didn't make any decisions, there was communication on when the meeting ended, but obviously it wasn't clear that this needed to be noticed this time. Right.
Having said that, I have no objection to having an open discussion with being live streamed.
That's exactly what I'm indicating. There won't be any decision made here. We are allowed to meet and discuss.
Well, we're already here, so we might as well just discuss it.
Okay, all right. Then we will make a decision on a potential meeting day after a discussion. Does that work?
Yes.
All right, just be keeping that kind of, I guess, in mind. So again, thank you, and I apologize for the administrative snafu. As I say, it was done in consideration of someone who had to drive home late at night. So this is really following up on a discussion we began last Monday at our Monday at our August monthly meeting. And just to give a little recap, in July, New York State announced round 6 of the Restore New York grant program, which provides funds to undertake renovation of vacant commercial and residential properties. And it was sort of exciting that they opened that grant program because it had not been funded in 5 years. Restore New York was a grant program that in 2017, New York State did have in their budget, but since 2017, there have been no grant funds under this. And as we mentioned that night, it's kind of a multi-step process to apply. Empire State Development is the one, ESD is the one that oversees the application process, and everything is done pretty much through the consolidated funding website. Interestingly, you would have to do your application online and mail a hard copy. So it's like they're got feet in both worlds. So the process, they opened it in July, and they said by August 11th, there was a need to submit an intent to apply. And if you did not submit something, you would not be eligible ever to put the grant in this cycle, in this grant cycle. So it was basically a notification. They looked at that and they said, you know, basically we're saving you if this doesn't look like a viable thing, you won't be putting together a 100-page application to us. So Cindy and I assembled the intent to apply for Restore New York funding, which is in your one of the pages in your packet for 100 Main Street. And it was submitted by the August 11th deadline. And a few days after submitting that intent to apply, we received an email saying you would be allowed to proceed with this application. One point I want to make is on this intent, you sort of had to, you know, describe the property, which was done, the estimated project cost, and the estimated Restore New York request. There was a question about that, how we came up with that. The building at 100 Main Street is over 12,000 square feet, but the lower level had always been, I don't think most people even knew that there was a lower level for storage and other materials. The retail space that originally was a Newberry store and a Grand Union grocery store when the building was built in 1931 is just over 6,000 square feet. So there is a formula for both construction and renovation, a same formula. And depending on your economic zone, and we are in the Mohawk Valley Regional Economic District, it was $163.28 per square foot was the amount that could be applied for. So taking 6,000, as I say, it was slightly more than that, but we took just 6,000 times $163.28 per square foot is how that figure was arrived at, 979,680. Also, in your materials is a application checklist. And you'll note that there are basically 18 documents which are required for submitting an application. If just one of them is missing or hasn't been adequately applied to the ESD, then the application is incomplete and would be considered. Important to note, of those 18, the bulk would need to be assembled and provided and inputted by the property owner developer. For the village, we would have just a few tasks, and specifically the last 3 items on that checklist. They are proof of publication of property assessment. This grant is really, if there were multiple buildings, some cities say, we're going to be doing this per block, so here's all the properties. We're obviously just doing one property, so it was sufficient. It's sufficient to just list that one property in a public hearing notice, talking about this potential grant application and giving the public the opportunity to speak on it. So the only actions that we would need to take within a couple weeks of prior to our September 26th meeting would be to set a public hearing. We're in no way at this point approving a grant application or disapproving anything. We're just we're basically crossing this element, which is in the village's purview and not the owner developer, which is proof of publication of the property name and proof of publication of the public hearing notice. So, and it has to be for 3 consecutive days. So that is the one task that the village has there that we would be doing. And the reason that in order to not have a separate hearing and another meeting, if we wanted to do it on September 26th, that we could maybe consider meeting next week sometime to do that. I thought, we've already sort of had one discussion. So at this point, we're really just talking about setting up the project and setting a public hearing. So in order to allow every voice at the table to be heard, I thought we'd go around the table and just so everybody can listen to each person individually and see what their thoughts are. So beginning with Cindy.
Okay, so I will say that I'm in favor of setting a public hearing from the start. I think that the CBS building is a hole in our current Main Street. I know there was some question as to whether you could really call it blighted, and perhaps it isn't blighted, but I do think having a building of that size in that location that is not occupied, that has windows that get covered with dust, that people draw obscene images in, I think it's a problem. And I think if we were to set a public hearing, we would hear from others that they too think that it is a problem that it sits in the state that it's in. I think we've actually already heard that. We heard it at a Meet the Candidates night. I think we all hear it on the street occasionally, what's happening with the CBS. I also think that this grant is an opportunity because it allows the village to have a stake in the project. And I think that's particularly important with this owner, that it allows us to provide connections with professionals who can make sure that this becomes done right, so to speak, that there are architects involved, that there are people who really know how to deal with historic buildings involved. I think we've all seen the sign in front right now, recruiting retired tradespeople. And this project could continue like that. But I think having an incentive like this and having the village have a stake in the game ensures it gets done faster and that it gets done using really quality design professionals and craftsmen to do the work. And I think, quite honestly, that the checklist provides the evidence that we need to calm some of our concerns, right? So it requires a letter of financial commitment. It requires, Richard was just asking me about ship over the materials, right? So when this is submitted, the materials have to be ready to go to the State Historic Preservation Office. this has to have local zoning compliance. Those things have to be put in place just to submit the application. And so setting a public hearing and hopefully, in my opinion, agreeing to move forward with the application puts the onus on the applicant to do these things that I feel make a successful project. Between now and when that public hearing will be held, the first of those has to happen, which is the applicant needs to go to our local historic preservation board, to HPAR, and make a presentation about what's going on with this building. And I think that is sort of a good gateway in terms of seeing how the rest of the process will transpire. Those are my thoughts at this point.
Richard?
First, and I'll leave this to Joe to elucidate, since you pointed out to me, I don't think this building qualifies. Two, how much is the owner performed? I count 10 of these items that could have been done by this point. I'll list them. 5 years operating pro formas, application fee to Empire State Development Corporation. Please have the check written. Property assessment list, project site map, individual property packet, up to 2 facade photos for all properties. Letter from that's what we're discussing here. Written comments, written commitments for project financing, third-party project estimates, credentials of individuals who and/or lead entities involved in the project, and non-municipal entity project proposals. So all of this could have been done, should have been done, would help me make my decision. How much of this has been done, and how much has the owner done since he asked us to support this? That's just one of my problems that I haven't seen. I haven't seen the owner come before us where we could question him completely and fully. I'm not happy, if we're gonna do this for somebody, I'd like to see the face that we're doing it for. And I understand all your concerns about how Main Street looks, and I agree with you on your concerns, but I have to know who I'm doing this for, who my long-term partner is gonna be, and whether or not I can communicate with it. I wanna see how the person responds to tough questioning. Because if they don't respond to tough questioning while they're coming for money, once they get the money, they're certainly not gonna respond.
I am happy with this resolution. At the time that we choose to take action, I will support going to a public hearing. I think that despite this property is owned by a private individual, that it is of great public interest to our constituents. And I also believe that a vacancy, any vacancy, but a vacancy of this size is like a fracture in a femur or in a bone. Main Street's the backbone of the community. Without it, we have nothing, and we would end up in a blighted position. And we have been able to fend off rural blight in a way that a lot of communities haven't been able to, because of how ambitious this board is and our staff and the work that's been done in downtown to kind of keep Cooperstown not just like alive, but in tip-top shape. And having CVS restored is a major priority. We heard it. I mean, I've been on board for almost 4 years. I've heard it essentially the entire time. Sometimes it's a hotter button than other times. I also, really happy with the additions that Cindy made to the resolution. I think it adds some teeth to it. I think it's a little more specific. Saying though that I'm in favor of a public hearing doesn't mean that I'm sold entirely on the partnership that we're creating. There isn't necessarily, there's not a commitment of village taxpayer dollars, and I think that with the owner of the property and with the proposed project, I think having both the village and the state as as agencies and as partners in this gives everybody kind of a voice and what we want to happen to CVS and the quality of that work, as Cindy mentioned. So I've only real stipulation in this is if we go to a public hearing, I want the individual named in this resolution to be here, preferably with representatives of his developer. Because I think that how he, how the developer and the other applicant besides us answers our questions will be very telling, and I think it will be appropriate for that to be done in front of all of the people who have interest in 100 Main Street. So when the time comes, I'll be good to go on moving this to a public hearing, but I still would like to see some more.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, thank you. I've got a number of questions, so this may be a little scattered. I'll try to keep it organized. First, I have a question. I noticed in the resolution, we have a reference to round 6. With what frequency and for how long are they going to be doing these grant proposal reception? I mean, in other words, we've got this round 6. We seem to be focusing on taking advantage of it. Is that the last train?
The last one, number 5, as I mentioned in my preliminary remarks, was 2017.
And
So hope, in all things, it'd be great, if they do number 7, within the year, another year. But again, we went almost 5 years without it, so
So the
that's all I
program
can
is still an authorized program. It just has to be funded
that is correct.
in the budget. Okay, so this isn't necessarily our last opportunity to do this. And I raise that because I'm concerned about the order of march. I think, to use another metaphor, we're putting the cart before the horse. To pick up on Richard's point, I think you mentioned in our last meeting that you and Cindy had spoken with the owner back in July, or was it even June? But the announcement of the round 6 happened in July. And so at that point, the opportunity became available for the owner to.
The owner did not, I will say, there was a while ago, and I sort of tried to check my phone. We were contacted by the owner. He purchased the property in November of 2021. So it was sometime in this spring, he asked to sort of meet and to find out what the village was interested in seeing in that spot. And we said, we're obviously interested in seeing retail, and active viable businesses, maybe 1 or 2 in there. And so, that was all we had posited to him, that we wanted to see that. Then probably because of that discussion sometime in the spring, and I can't tell you the date, when this was announced in July, and both Cindy and I, we saw the announcement, and we both, I don't know if anyone else on the board attended the webinar on it. There was a webinar on it, and we thought, well, does this fit? Does this fit? And this one seemed to push the buttons because it was vacant, which there's a criteria rating system. And I don't mean to take your time, but I was just trying to answer your question. So he didn't come to us. We then went to him.
And that was when the July round announcement.
It was in early August, we met with the owner of the property.
So between then and your first contact, when he came and asked you, and August, he hadn't really been engaged with us further?
Not with me.
If I look at my calendar, we met with Jim Florzak on December 16th.
It was last year,
Yeah, it's December 16th of 2021.
within a month of his buying.
So soon after he had bought the property,
Okay.
about what the village's interest was. I don't have another meeting showing on my calendar.
Then, no, Cindy, it may have been that one. I knew it was after he purchased it, but I didn't think it was 9 months ago.
The webinar was on July 15th, and then there was the induction. So the next meeting that I have on my calendar with him was July 28th.
And that's when you introduced him to this funding mechanism?
Mhm. Yeah.
July 28th?
Yeah.
Okay. So since then, has he done anything?
I am aware that he has engaged a financial individual to help him understand the finances and the application mechanism for this, and that he has contacted the architects who we used on this building to work with them on the renderings in anticipation of an HPAR meeting.
And does he have any timeline for organizing a presentation to us?
Well, I know he's making a presentation to HPAR on the 13th, so
So that's the only one of our zoning boards that he would need to go to. He has already submitted, if Marcia received it today, to give to the CEO a copy of that application. And we can send that around to all the boards so you can see it. It's going to be going, it hasn't gone yet even to HPAR, but in that he does reference HP that he's retained as consultants.
Okay, so as I recall from 10 Chestnut, HPAR was one spoke in the wheel, right? We ourselves had a number of hearings, public meetings, information, and I don't know if they were formal hearings or public information, but we heard my impression of how I would see this proceeding is that there would be a point in time when a presentation would be made of what the project is going to be.
Mhm.
And it would be on that basis that we would make a decision whether to support the application.
I think that could certainly happen from a zoning perspective. It does not have to happen because this is an existing building with presumably a use that's permitted in the business district.
Right, Chestnut Crossings needed to have variances, so it went to CBA, it needed the planning, and so it had those things. This, the only one it would really need is HPAR. And in the packet are a series of historic photographs, and I will, since you're speaking, I'll start this with Mac and go around. This building was built in 1931. It was originally built as a two business structure as an original J.J. Newberry's and a Grand Union. The building, this photograph, particular one is in 1939. It remained two businesses well into the early 60s. And then became solely the Grand Union, and then later the AAD, and then later Brooks Pharmacy. So it was in the era of Brooks Pharmacy that the 60s facade was added to it. The reason he is totally interested in taking back the structure to an historical context that would more closely align with some of our 19th century buildings.
So I'm looking now at the letter of intent, and you and I corresponded today about it. I'm looking at what's on its face. And on its face, it says that the building is zoned commercial and the building has 12,000 square foot with half the footage serving at street level retail space. So the owner, as we talked about at one of our last meetings, has building-wide improvements or renovations to make, including HVAC and so on and so forth. The statement that caught my attention because of my own conversations in our last meeting about trying to repair some upper level
Joe,
living space on the
I'm
commercial.
so sorry, I have to go, guys. I'm really sorry about that.
So Mac, just so I know beforehand, the 9th you're back in town. So if we were to meet jointly, that would be, and then 8 o'clock on the 9th. What?
I could do 8 o'clock on Friday morning. I could also do Monday of next week, but I know that it's an urgent matter, so I will do.
One day the following week.
Yeah, Monday the following week.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Richard. Sorry, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt.
So my point here is that on the face of this application, we are representing that the entire building is unoccupied. It's a 12,000 foot building, and my understanding was that we have to have a totally unoccupied building. And even though we developed a grant proposal with the total square footage for half of the area, the presentation here is about an entire building that is unoccupied and unused. And it's half used, it's half occupied.
I wouldn't call it occupied, but there's stuff.
There's
in it.
storage, even when this was a Newberry's or Grand Union, those were never a level that was available to the public.
No, but that's
Okay,
not
That's a
the
very
point, right?
great question.
The point, as I understand this criterion for getting a grant, is that they are looking for buildings that are derelict, that are an eyesore, that are not serving any function. They're trying to get, from the state's perspective, they're trying to get the worst and worst and don't make it the best and worst. So just because of that criterion of vacant and unoccupied, or unoccupied and unused, I think those are terms of art and their own descriptor and their own criteria. And this building is used with half its space, and it is occupied by the owner. The fact that it isn't a public use, to me, is immaterial, or those two adjectives are meant to describe a building that is so derelict that, but for an infusion of state money, nothing will ever be done with it. This building is a totally functional building.
I think that's a very valuable question. I can say that we've already had some questions that we contacted ESD to receive, for instance, on the checklist. And again, I don't want to take up your time, but I just wanted to answer this question. The 5 years operating pro formas, that just means, what does it exactly mean? So we asked specific questions. Does this mean a particular type of document? Do you have a form that they have to fill out their business operating plan, or do they just provide it? And we just actually got a response back saying no, and answering various questions. So that's a great question, and we'll make sure that that's asked. And
I can read the definition from the guidelines.
yeah, as well,
So it
but I
says-
will also ask just to make sure.
It says vacant shall mean having no occupants or is mostly unoccupied.
And unused,
It does not say unused.
unused is.
But I'm reading you the
Mostly
definition.
vacant.
But is unused one of the terms?
No. Abandoned means a wrecked or derelict building that has been left abandoned and unprotected. That's really not this. Condemned means a building declared by official order to be unfit for use. That hasn't happened as of yet. Surplus means a municipally owned building deemed surplus or no longer required. And vacant means having no occupants or is mostly unoccupied.
No, there's a term, the term in this is
Yeah.
vacant and unused, right? And unused.
We have unoccupied and unused, and so
I think
here's my point. I am concerned, I would like to get this cleared up, because this building, to me, in the sort of the context of that guideline, is on the margin of being eligible. And we are promoting, I know we've made, Ellen, you described the multiplication that you went through to get 1,000 square foot times whatever that, well, I can't remember what the per square foot number was, but we have $979,000, but in fact, that money is being used for the entire building. Necessarily.
It would be
because
used for utilities possibly that might affect the lower
Right.
level.
Because we say the building has been, the village would work with the new owner to upgrade the mechanical systems, restore the historic facade, and renovate the interior for commercial tenants. So of the three, one is definitely a building-wide system, where it's not going to be confined to the unused vacant part. my question is that a distinction with a difference? On the face of this, we are saying that the entire building is unused and unoccupied, and it isn't.
So unused though is not a criteria of this.
Right, but it is our descriptor, which
It is.
means nothing's going on in the building.
Yeah.
It's neither occupied nor used. And it's sort of,
I think we were thinking of the retail, which has not been in the building since 2018. So I think we were using that
But
term.
it's clear that retail has nothing to do.
It
with
won't
that.
be any of the question, you know, that we have, the actual application will have that check.
right, so when we're looking at so that would be, that's a good question if we run through this checklist. The 5 years of operating performance is, to me, what we plan to do in the future with this building. What's our business plan, basically, right?
It's his.
And so that will include or not all of the building. It probably will include all the building, and say my basement is my stuff and my upstairs is going to be, I've got this vision for retail. So we need to see that. But I don't want to linger over this, but I am concerned that when ESD said, its reaction to this was, okay, we're in the queue, this gets this building.
It is, yeah, it's, you have, this meets what we need, and you should bother with the 100-page application. You should have the owner developer proceed.
Okay, so, but it was on the basis of this statement.
100%. So I will clarify that. I
Okay.
have a note right here that I will ask ESD. It's been purchased. The owner has moved material into the lower level, which was never kind of retail. With the calculation of 6,000 square feet was for the street level, what we view
Right.
as potential business area.
Right. And I'll make a comment on the last part, which we didn't get a chance to discuss. The last sentence talks about the 37 feet of frontage. This, to me, the absence of what used to be there is a disappointment, and is what we really, that's what we miss. But the building, as it sits there, is intact. There are no broken windows, there's a good sidewalk, you can pass it in 5 seconds if you're just walking at regular pace or so. So, to me, if I had read this beforehand, I don't know that it detracts from the downtown as a whole. And I don't think residents are uncomfortable walking past a building. It's not like a building that someone's gonna jump out of, grab you and drag you in and do you harm. It's just a vacant front. So the optics of this, I was, sort of took me aback. I think there's a difference between wanting something to be made of this building and this building being sort of a blight or an unsafe for people, or actually fear-inducing structure. It's a disappointment, but I don't think it's the other things. So that's my comment on the application that has enabled us to get the response that, yeah, your applicant can file his papers. If they look more closely at it, I don't know what will happen with that. So in terms of our governmental engagement, the quote unquote burden, in addition to the bottom 3 items, we do have a role to play in the secret process, right?
Right, but that would be only if there is an approved, we move forward, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah, at this, yeah.
Right, but that's part of what we're buying into. So I just wanted to make sure that was.
It would be a type 2 most likely, correct?
Okay, and then I'm good to hear this. It's good to hear this report of this presentation to HPAR, but that may help inform a lot of my concerns. But it's the sequencing of things. We don't know have or don't have yet from this applicant. And the action to set a hearing is for the purpose of the resolution or passing this resolution. And
No, it's to have a public hearing to announce that we would be considering applying for a Restore New York grant for 100 Main Street. Then the whole idea of a public hearing is then the public comments.
right,
And then after we've listened to them, there is a board decision at do we go forward and approve applying for this, at which point the formal way to do that is the resolution which they provided and we've tweaked.
they being the applicant.
No, it was in the,
I took it from another municipality.
yeah,
Oh,
but
okay,
it's
so-
basically that it's, you can see that that's what,
We
You know.
retrieved this, the applicant didn't give us this.
no.
Okay, so, okay. By the time we, get to this meeting, so H-Park isn't until the 13th, and this meeting we want to end, we're thinking about a meeting on the 8th or 9th,
Just to set the public hearing.
Nine would,
to set the public.
Public hearing presumably would be for the 26th.
So what we're representing in this resolution right now can easily be and timely edited to reflect future developments.
correct.
Okay.
When was, the Restore New York grants announced?
July 5th.
What?
July 5th.
Okay.
I think that's all I have for now.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to comment on what Joe just said about detracts from the main street. I think being spooky and scary is a lot different than detracting as a whole from the business district, which I think is a very opinionated statement. Like, I
Can't hear
personally
you,
think,
Mom, sorry.
I personally think it does detract, but that, I think that as a whole is an opinion, so.
No, I was just commenting on the word used, uncomfortable. Why did it uncomfortable?
Okay.
I will say I called it uncomfortable because I routinely wipe obscene graffiti traced in the dust off of the windows.
An owner's
You know,
responsibility.
let's,
It is 100%.
I'm interested in hearing what Hannah has to
Yes.
say instead of having a debate going on.
No, sure.
I think I made my opinions very clear last time, so I don't think I need to say more about it. I would support moving forward to a public hearing, but I'm not saying that I would support anything past that. So I think that's all I have to say for today.
Thank you, Hannah.
Yeah, I support moving forward with the public hearing. I think having a public hearing to hear from the public and then also potentially the owner of the building would be really useful to us as a board. I also think that whoever did attend that public hearing, it would be useful for them to hear from the owner to sort of get a sense of what the plan is and how they, want to go about it. It is exciting for me to think about the prospect of this building moving in a direction. Because as long as I've lived in Cooperstown, it's been a vacant space. I've never experienced it as anything other than that. I do agree with Hannah that I think it is, it detracts from Main Street. It is like, just due to the sheer size of the building and the fact that it's vacant. It's not an exciting look when people are looking in and trying to see if something's going on. They're like always a little bit disappointed, to echo Joe. So, I guess that's all I really have to say. I think that unless we act in some way, shape, or form, there's the chance that that nothing happens with the building. And I think for the future of Cooperstown, that might be a worse situation to be in, so.
Question. Haven't there been displays in the window or things to?
There were, yeah,
The previous owner.
Prior to it.
right, when it was for sale,
Okay.
there were displays.
So there's nothing there now, right?
There's just those signs that say retired workers.
Yeah, but there
The
wasn't,
one thing
there was,
that,
but there was a display before this was bought.
In 2020, when the graduates of our high school really didn't have even a graduation, there were, we allowed, if you recall, their posters to be hung on our lampposts, and then there were so many of them, they were also in the window, and that was the most attractive I had seen that building in many,
Yeah,
many years.
and I also think that the only other display that I could think of that I actually saw was, I believe, on behalf of whoever the realtor was in charge of that building, had put
I
up.
think there was something for Winter Carnival, there was
Yes,
like something,
yeah.
a student organization did something, like there were several things.
Mhm.
But I asked why, just out of curiosity, why do you wonder about that?
I just wonder why, as a public service, knowing that we would have liked that, it hasn't been done. It could have been done for the last 9 months.
But I think,
I'm not.
Yeah, no,
That's a rhetorical question.
yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that that is a great question to ask, but also to go back to Cindy's point, this gives us a chance to sort of put our stake in it and sort of move things in directions that the village might want to see it go. And so if we have a chance to do that, and there's also a chance to make something out of what is currently nothing, then it would behoove us to do so. So that's all I have to say.
Could, I haven't had a chance to speak yet, Joe, do you wanna? Okay.
No.
Could I have the picture back?
Oh, yes, of course.
I have to say, you know, having been on the board when we cited the new CVS, et cetera, I think several of us were. I think the building that was constructed works well. Everyone still bemoans the loss of our Main Street CVS. They were never going to stay there. They didn't own the building. The same family that constructed this building in 1931 still owned it and had an extremely lucrative lease with CVS. They had no impetus to restore or do anything with that building. CVS was paying over $14,000 a month. 17,000 a month, plus paying all the taxes, all the utilities, and the upkeep on that building. When that business moved out, they initially tried to market this building at like 1.5 million. It's in their portfolio. We're now in like the third generation of the man who oversaw the construction of this. I will say that this photo is in the Smith-Telford collection. It's also in the Mile of Memories book that our mom wrote, who is a village historian. And it's always been my desire to see that 1962 facade off, something done with this facility, this building. I think it has great, great potential. I remember it as a viable Newberry's. I remember it as a viable grocery store. I think it has great potential. And, you know, that is one component that I know Cindy added to the resolution. The tax benefit. Right now, other than property tax, there is nothing. There's no sales tax, there's nothing being generated by this building. I will say that the DRI, which the Downtown Revitalization Initiative, for which the village always threw its hat in, we're now throwing it in the New York Forward because that's designed for small communities like us. That building was always one of the ones that was cited because it is that the downtown revitalization is exactly that, and the New York Forward has that same focus, your downtown. And this is a downtown major structure that is wholly non-contributing, unattractive, and I'm sorry, you could say otherwise, but I think it's a bit of an eyesore in the midst of our beautiful 19th century conserved downtown. So I will say New York Forward and DRI loves the positive synergy. And when I've asked questions about this project and gotten responses, they said, if you're at all interested in, you know, you're putting your New York Forward boundary, and we had shown you that boundary, it's down our Main Street into Doubleday, etc. they would love to see part of that New York Forward being Main Street facades and other improvements, grants to business owners to improve their facades. And they love the positive synergy that we'd be looking at an additional support. And again, this is not something that's ultimately going to cost the village. There is a component that we would have contracts in place for the developer owner to cover all those. We would not be at a financial risk for it. One of the people he is now working with, who helped assemble his HPARB application, is Doug Galati. He's a former Wilbur Bank, Community Bank president. He has his own consulting business and does this kind of business development. And also his utilization of HKK, the individuals who, done so much of our like recommendations for our window restorations and everything in this historic structure. So to have that involvement, and this is the way that we would be able to move forward with that involvement if we had a piece of the game. So those are kind of my thoughts on it. So Joe?
And this, it said in all seriousness, the comparable, it strikes me, more than ever, the comparable property to the CVS building is the general store.
I'm sorry.
The comparable building to CVS is the general store.
Mm-hmm.
Its basement is a conservation facility.
Storage.
The CVS is an ersatz conservation facility, and the upstairs is vacant. And it's got photographs in the windows, and people don't know what to make of it.
That isn't a viable option. I will say 2-3 years ago, we included that because it's attractive. I mean, because it has nice murals advertising our local cultural institutions. But they were approached about coordinating something like this, and they were not interested.
But your point is just an equivalent type of property, upstairs not being used, downstairs being used.
And not generating sales taxes upstairs, although doing a lot of other things elsewhere.
Well,
So I mean, I'm just saying we have other impacts on our main street. So in terms of an order of march, I'm still very confused about this. We have an HPAR meeting coming up in which some kind of presentation is going to be made. What is either HPAR looking for, or what are we looking for in terms of a fairly complete application before we actually vote to ask for one?
I would say that I feel it would be disingenuous of us to ask the applicant to spend what is thousands of dollars to pull that together if we're thinking we're not gonna support the application.
Okay, so here's the thing. Where is the balance? At what point, what's the tipping point to our being out in front on this, reputationally and otherwise, and their skin in the game?
No, I agree
That's
with
exactly the term I was thinking.
having the applicant make a presentation to us about his intentions, I think is fair. Having him provide everything that's on that checklist before there's an assurance that the application will go through, I think is an overreach.
Yeah,
So-
and that was sort of mentioned, he could have been doing all these things. Well, this is letters from local planning and zoning officials. He couldn't get that until this September 13th meeting. So he is working through these steps. Obviously the facade photos he's actually submitting with his HPARB application. So
Yeah, I mean, I have confidence in HPAR's capability to vet this from HPAR's perspective. And so that item that's great to have that. But to go back to Cindy's statement, you gave me the bookends, Cindy, but I'm not sure where you find the middle point. It's extreme to say they've got to have this package complete before we say anything.
Right.
but we have an expectation of something. We fairly have an expectation of something, and so it's all about the due diligence, and it's all about the commitment.
I would feel that that would be potentially at the public hearing time. Would you not, Cindy?
To have all of that,
No, to have a presentation.
Oh, yeah, I could-
Yeah, then you could, he would hear any public comments, like, I don't wanna see X, Y, Z. And I believe he would probably be coming with Doug Galati and HKK, and, those professionals would be probably telling you more. I do know in his HPARB application, he is looking at returning it to a 2 stores. That is a huge space to
Right.
rent to one.
Right.
And so, dividing it, so at most you have 3,000 square feet and 2 separate entrances, just as it was originally constructed,
Mhm.
is the way he is looking at proceeding.
Right, so, go ahead. I'm sorry.
You can bring all the people in the world in here in front of me to say, this is what we plan to do. I want to see documentation. I want to see effort that this is going to be a reasonable partner with us. I want to know past efforts and partnerships. I mean, you can say all you want, they'll bring somebody in, they can tell us about it, but Joe's right. There could have been some skin in the game here. We could have seen a 5 years operating pro forma. That's something he does himself. I mean, doesn't need to send that out. We could have seen a property assessment list. He should know what his property is.
If that is, well, I just told you what that is. If you look down to the third from the bottom, that is, it is essentially, they call it a property assessment list because it's for like urban areas who are doing like a block of 8 buildings. So then they do one for each. We're doing one property. That is a question we have asked the VSD and said, so can we just in the public hearing list the one property, which is 100 Main Street? Does that qualify as the property assessment list since it will be published in the public hearing? So he does not have to do that.
I did not check off on the list of things I wanted, letters from local planning officials, because he can't have that at this point.
Correct.
I'd like to, again, there's things here that could be done or have been done, but I must say something. The fact that you and Cindy have known about this since last December, when he came to you.
We did not know about
Okay, you
it.
said didn't you say you met with him in December?
yeah, because he asked
That's just what we thought.
what was permissible within the building, zoning wise.
Okay.
And that's not what we're talking about now. There was no
No,
discussion
I mean, not
of
that,
authority or.
but he can come to the board with a question that could have been shared with the rest of the board to get a feel for what was going on. You said you talked to him again, when did you next talk to him? You haven't talked to him at all?
The end of July.
Again, all right, fine, the end of July is just recent.
Yeah,
But-
so we came at the next board meeting.
I think it'd be easier to get me to go along with things if I knew from the beginning what was going on. But what?
But I don't want to cut you off. But it might relate to what you were saying. Are we allowed to suggest that he has some aspects of this list complete by the
Sure,
board
of course.
meeting? And if that was, something that he did and he was able to present that to us at the public hearing as a part of a presentation, that might give us an idea of how much effort has already been put and how much skin has been put into the game on his.
I agree.
And that would help, I think, all of us make a better decision, right? So it's not asking him to do all of it, it's just suggesting that,
And
having some of these.
the answer to the question itself would be informative.
Yeah, so I feel like that should be something that we pass along, and a public hearing would then give us an idea of what.
Yeah, here's another way to put it with all the planning stuff that I've had to be, the notion is a Gantt chart, a timeline. It's called a Gantt chart. When you're building a project, you have to have this done before you can do that. You've got to have the window guy before you, and so on. So that's what I see this checklist, but I would like to see his implementation plan, is how he gets how he navigates this, because if he can show us a roadmap of what he himself has now understood to have to do, then we know that's a little skin in the game. And then we know his order of march and his milestones and deadlines and milestones, that sort of thing. Anybody who's gonna work for him is gonna have to do that if there's gonna be a coherent project development. Especially processing it through the state side.
And there's no reason it couldn't have been done.
Be that as it may, this is, I'm trying to get at Cindy's point, what's too much to ask?
Right.
That, to me, is not too much to ask. Anybody who's planning an undertaking like this is going to have that kind of a chart.
I don't know that he's ever gonna have a Gantt chart. Wait.
Well, those are, but his people, he has people for that. The owner has people for that. These things, because those people know what they have to do in the order they have to do
Yeah.
it. They will be the advisors to say, if you're serious about this, this is how you're gonna get there.
Yeah.
So to your point, Cindy, that's what I'm,
Yeah, no, I understand.
And that's part of the risk, you know, when you buy something like this, you know, that's kind of figure into your cost of doing business, if you want to do something. We're saying we can't ask them to spend this money. I
it's
have
not,
a
it's
problem
not
with
an
that.
insistence, it's just, it's how do we
I'm saying,
understand?
we can want the information, and if it's gonna cost money to get the information, it's a cost of doing business here,
Yeah,
and it's a
but-
business risk.
But what I'm saying is asking someone to prepare information, particularly for an application that may or may not be submitted, is, I feel, disingenuous.
But wait a minute, aren't we
His
supporting his
application,
application?
Oh,
yeah.
I have a question for
We
you.
had the same question.
How far in advance of a public hearing? So this isn't a zoning public hearing, like I can't
Mhm.
find the guidelines for how far in
If it can
advance
be
needs
done,
to be
it's
advertised.
under the it's under the public meeting law. If you declare that you need to have a meeting, you have a purpose for the meeting, all you have to do is make sure you've notified the press.
But I'm talking about a public hearing.
Oh, public hearing, I think you've got, what, 7 or 10 days. you
Yeah,
have
that's
to
what
be-
I'm trying to
Yep,
find, and I have not been able to find it.
I can get to that section. but-
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, because we ran.
But you can
into
set
before.
this meeting, you can't set it tonight,
No.
No,
but
no,
if
no,
you
I know.
all, you can have a meeting, and then you have to put a notice, you have to notify the newspaper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That you're having it, and that can be the day of. We have done that many times where a municipality has a real problem. And it just has to be public, there has to be the right of the press to be here on behalf of the public. So this meeting, you don't have to worry about the meeting that you're trying to have to start this process and do
No,
whatever.
so if we are able to meet Friday, the 9th at 8 AM, that would give us plenty of time
Mhm.
it gives us essentially
7 days.
14, I'm talking before 1, 7, 14. It gives us like 17 days. We've got plenty of time.
What day did you say? I thought you said the 9th.
I did.
The 9th is not 8 days from now.
No, from the 9th to the 26th.
Oh, this one, okay, fine.
Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, Bruce.
Okay, do you okay?
Yeah, I was just looking for whether it was 7 or 10.
Even
I
if
think
it's,
it's 7.
even if it's 10, Cindy, what I'm saying is we have it, but the 9th would be the 19th, and our meeting is the 26th.
Right, but it takes 3 days to get it in the newspaper minus the weekend.
Right,
I just wanna make sure we don't back
That other
ourselves
meeting,
too
that other
close.
meeting is okay now. But Martin, we can't be disingenuous about this. We can't know that we're gonna wanna meet in 8 days or 9 days, 10 days.
No.
And then pretend to declare it 2 days before.
No.
if we leave this meeting, it sounds like, just let me do that.
The mayor can call a
I
meeting at
suggested
any
that.
time.
We can do the
She's
9th
just
at 8 a.m.
facilitated
Does that
calling
work?
it by
Does that work
knowing
for
when
you? The
people are
9th is, yeah.
available.
We
And
will.
then that notice
Yeah.
goes in.
We will, it's 9th at 8 AM seems to work with everyone. So we will plan on that, and Marcia will be sure tomorrow morning that Jenna knows the notification will go out right away, Richard.
I do have another matter.
Go, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mark.
I have a question that I think may have been answered, and I probably just missed it, because I've been on there work. When is this application due, if it were to be?
It is due October 11th.
Okay.
So then by the board meeting.
He should have
You should have many.
most of this stuff.
I would imagine. That is the reason
So
he
then
has
I don't
hired
think it's
Joe.
overreaching to tell him that.
No, but we will certainly,
No, I don't.
Yeah.
Having it in final form though, like Joe had at one point suggested seeing like a complete application on the 26th, or at least that's the way I read your email, and I think that that's pushing it a little bit.
Okay, so point well taken. October 11th for something like this is,
It's all they ever give
it's the
you.
day after tomorrow. I mean.
that is why, and
So-
I know you felt that we were sort of moving, but if we hadn't done the letter of intent, you know, this wouldn't have gotten even we wouldn't be in this round.
Right, but this is not the point. It's not what the
Okay,
village
I'm
has to
sorry.
do. It's the logistics of what he has to do. So the reason I reacted to the October 11th, great point, is that he's got something intermediate to offer us
Yeah.
that we can fairly, not unfairly, that we can fairly ask for. Give me the draft application, as far as you got it, or whatever. But
Yeah.
again, the seriousness of purpose is what I'm most concerned about, frankly.
Yeah, me too.
So if there's nothing else, we've all agreed by consensus that we will meet on September 9th at 8 AM. That'll be noticed, and if there, I will try and get an answer to any of the questions that have been raised today from ESD, and we will be, I'm sorry?
Did you say September 9th?
Yeah, Friday, September 9th at 8 AM. And so in particular, I'm asking that, you know, there is collection material on the lower level, et cetera. I will be asking those questions of ESD to make sure they fully grasped our letter of intent. Is there anything else people would like me to ask ESD? I can put it in the same email. Okay, all right. Well then, if that is it, thank you all for meeting for this discussion. I appreciate it. Thank you, Marcia, for staying late and taking your minutes.
You know, this wasn't the official meeting.
Dinner or guys.
No, actually.
No one would know who we were.
You can't adjourn a meeting that isn't.
Well, all right. You
Look,
can only-
look, I'm being facetious now. Tell
Number 9. My anniversary.
It's your birthday.
You got your
But
birthday.
this one, and that, but this one,
you know, up or down, it'll be over quickly.
Yeah.
These meetings-
Probably one month.
Nothing but a